can
Yeah,
wait.
thank you.
You know what I did? That was silly. I forgot a pen.
Yeah, I can provide
Sorry
you
for
a
that.
pen in
I,
1 minute.
I have my.
No, no, we have the pen.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have paper or do you need
Yeah, yeah,
paper?
no, paper I have. I don't know, but I just didn't take a pen. Right, that sounds far more technological than in my case.
Yeah,
I,
we have to do that.
I always get nervous with if I use the iPad a lot, but I think if you're doing a presentation and it goes blank.
Yes,
I don't know.
Pen?
it's always a
I'm
risk.
fine.
I
And
don't
it's
want to
less
jinx it
visual.
now.
It's less visual, I find.
Yes, yes. Although, with this, you can also,
Yep, correct.
this is my visual.
That's a very messy one.
Yes, I try to structure the
Okay,
head.
I think we are ready to start. Welcome to the last panel of our Brussels Indo-Pacific Forum. This panel is on geoeconomics and direct power rivalry. I'm Antonio Calcara. I head the Geopolitics and Technology program here at the Center for Security Diplomacy and Strategy. It's a great pleasure to moderate this discussion. So I think geoeconomics was mentioned basically in every panel, in every discussion that we had in this 1 day and a half. So geoeconomics, namely basically the strategic use of economic tools or different type of tools and technologies to advance geopolitical interests, I think has moved from being a very term for specialists to being one of the defining features of global politics. So the intensifying strategic competition between the United States and China has really elevated trade, technology, critical raw materials, supply chain, data, and finance as sort of central instruments of statecraft. So countries no longer compete in markets, they are increasingly competing through markets. And I think for Europe and the Indo-Pacific partners, this has very profound implications. How to protect openness while managing risks, how to secure critical technologies, and how to navigate in a world in which interdependence is increasingly contested or, as we heard this morning, weaponized. Europe, I think, is discovering painfully that vulnerabilities in supply chain can quickly become also vulnerabilities in our security architecture. And in many ways, I think European and Indo-Pacific partners face remarkably similar dilemmas as they seek to build resilient and trusted technological and economic ecosystems. I think this new environment also requires us to rethink long-standing assumptions that we have. So rapid technological change and advancements in semiconductors, in artificial intelligence, in space technologies, in quantum computing are not just driving innovation, but they are also reshaping the strategic landscape in which we live in. So countries that lead in these areas can gain disproportionate leverage, making really technology as a central feature of technological competition. So I think we need to ask ourselves, can global supply chain remain global? How do we reconcile efficiency with resilience? What is the right balance of defensive instruments that we have, for instance, investment screening, export control, without undermining competitiveness and innovation? And how can Europe work with like-minded countries, including in the Indo-Pacific, to avoid fragmentation and to promote more predictable and transparent cooperation? I think these are not just abstract issues. They have a direct impact on the industry that needs to comply with basically new rules and also needs to navigate a more competitive and difficult and fragmented geoeconomic environment. These are also have also implications for research institutes and for research collaboration more in general that has been driven actually by global talent and the possibility of having cross-border funding, and all these things are becoming also very contested and weaponized. So today's discussion is really about all these numerous things that I mentioned and all the new geoeconomic environment in which we are living in. We are very lucky because we have three outstanding speakers that will help us actually to unpack some of these issues. On my immediate left, María Martín Prat, Deputy Director at DG Trade. Also, great deal of expertise on Asia. We are very lucky to have you here, and many thanks for accepting our invitation. We have Christoph Luykx, Head of Government Relations at IMEC, that represent one of the world's leading research institutes, and also a Belgian excellence working on semiconductors. So we are very proud to have you here. And then last but certainly not least, Professor Kazuto Suzuki is the Director of the Group Head for Economic Security at the Institute of Geoeconomics in Tokyo. Is one of the leading experts on technological policy and on the weaponized on interdependence, and also a long-time friend of CSDS. So many thanks for being here as well. So each speaker will start with 5-7 minutes introductory remarks. After that, I will pose myself 1/2 follow-up questions, and then I will open the floor for questions and comments. I would like to start with you, Maria, as a first speaker. If you can give us the European Union perspective on the new geoeconomic environment in which we're living in, on trade and economic security more specifically. Thanks again for being here.
Thanks, and it's a pleasure to be here, as always. And I can give you the point of view of the European Commission from, indeed, the trade and economic security angle. And I have the impression that you have probably already, in the prior discussions, been looking into the reality of the shift that has happened from efficiency to resilience, to autonomy, to security. That is a reality, is not new. What I think it becomes now interesting, and the real challenge, is the balance that you were making a reference to, and is a particularly difficult one to get. Now, if we look into the reality, we do know the main sources of challenges, in part linked to the size and economic system of China, but the change in the US administration and the, let's say, confirmation of a certain trend that is been delinking the US from a more traditional rules-based trade. Those are realities that are with us now for quite some time, but that have also created, if you want, a chain of reaction. Very often we talk about the erosion of rules-based trade in reaction to those challenges, in reaction to critical dependencies, in reaction to the need to ensure that we don't have dependencies that can be used as a weapon against us, in reaction to, for instance, overcapacity from China. But what we have seen, reacting to overcapacities, reacting to the need to negotiate with the United States, and so forth and so on, you can see that we are little by little, many of us, having to do exercises of flexibility in terms of some of the cornerstones of the trade system, whether you're talking about national treatment, MFN, or non-discrimination. It is a complex one, and one that, in the Commission at least, we make a big effort to try to maintain, in the understanding as well that there is a need to reform a number of the rules that have underpinned, in particular at multilateral level, the trade system, but one that we make an effort to maintain, because basically we continue to be an economy that requires to be open, not only in terms of input, but also in terms of economic growth, competitiveness, and innovation. So we've been adapting to the new reality, and we have done it in different ways. A very obvious one, and possibly the positive one, is being a greater effort to diversify. And this is very clear with the region of the world that you are discussing today. We have seen an acceleration of bilateral trade negotiations with a number of countries in the Indo-Pacific that are important potential partners for us, are de facto already important potential partners, but we are negotiating, as you know, with India, with Thailand, with Malaysia, with the Philippines, hoping to close with Australia, and have close agreements with Indonesia, recently a little bit less recently with New Zealand. As you know, we do have important FTAs in place with Japan, with Korea, with Vietnam, with Singapore. So we are already very linked to a region in which we are the first investors, and that makes us as well a very important trade partner, and where we see as well, in different degrees and shapes, but a common objective of having predictability and rules-based trade, and also a objective of diversification. I'm not saying this is a simple objective, and there are dynamics created also because of the negotiations of the US with those countries that may pose challenges going forward. I'm thinking in particular as regards supply chains, but it's a very important, and in that way, positive development. What we are doing as well, and that is still within trade, remember, trade is not only openness, it's trade defense. And what we are doing is using, in an even more intensive manner, our trade defense instruments to try to address problems, whether it is with subsidies or with dumping. And we are also intensively starting to use other tools that we have to defend the level playing field within the European Union as well. And I think there, for instance, the use of a tool like the foreign subsidies regulation, i.e. the possibility to scrutinize investment or participation in procurement in Europe that it is backed by subsidies that we will consider illegal is an important tool. So we are, on the one hand, reaching out to partners, on the other hand, deploying and using our autonomous tools. What else? You will see tomorrow that we will be publishing what we've been referring to as our economic security doctrine, but we will have a more neutral title, that doctrine. But basically, it's an effort to try to, in a more operational and proactive manner, continue to be working on what we had already announced in the first economic security communication that we did a couple of years back, where we're talking about the need to promote our internal market, protect it, but also partner with our countries. And I think that is going to guide not only our engagement with our countries, but also the use of our existing tools, the assessment as to whether we need new tools, but also the need to be very specific internally and when working with our partners as to identification of dependencies, vulnerabilities in our supply chains, working together in what in many instances are common problems that we face, and issues that we can address much better if we manage to have a degree of cooperation. The cooperation with Indo-Pacific partners, besides the FTAs that I was referring to, is now getting a fair amount of attention because, as you may know, relatively recently we were in Australia, Commissioner Šefčovič was in Australia, and we concluded at the occasion of the meeting of the ministers of the countries, trade ministers of the countries part of the CPTPP, we concluded a first joint agreement for the CPTPP and the European Union to work together. It is extremely important for us. We are talking about a very important number of countries that are concerned about the situation of trade rules, that want to work to address a number of the problems, including in the WTO, and where we can have very important cooperation on issues such as critical raw materials, diversification of supply chain, digital trade, and in general trade facilitation. So this is a cooperation that we believe going forward is important. It doesn't mean that we are shifting from multilateral to plurilateral. It means that we think plurilateral is important to advance fast, which is now very, very much required, and inject into a process that is going to take longer, which is the multilateral one. So basically, you will see those efforts, and you will also see that, in particular, with key partners that have developed already important economic security policies. I may be talking about Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and others. We want to engage into that type of discussion. We've been doing it already for some time, for instance, to exchange experience and practices as regards the screening of foreign direct investment or the control of dual-use exports. But I think now clearly we are going forward in terms also of identification of risks and mitigating measures. So that is an area of work that we are prioritizing, including with the Indo-Pacific. All that to say, in terms of the EU and the region that occupies you today, we are, if anything, working and getting closer. That's probably one of the positives of the current very challenging geopolitical situation. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Maria. I think this was really an excellent start. I really liked especially 2 points. So the first one is really the scale of the challenge that we have, and basically how to try to balance between predictability and flexibility. And I think, like what you mentioned, the plurilateral is a way to inject more flexibility also in our process of negotiating, for instance, with third countries. And the second point that I really liked is the need to be open, but to balance this openness with security. And I think this is a perfect segue for Christoph, actually, because you're really on the front line when it comes to all this discussion, because IMEC is embedded in a global value chain. Is an indispensable player in a global value chain that was really, or the one on semiconductor was really based on efficiency and specialization, but is now really under stress because of basically geopolitics entering into this field. So I would like to, and you have of course a vantage point because you are part of that global value chain, and you see this on your in your activity on a day-to-day basis. So I would like to ask you how do you see this balance between openness and security, and what are the challenges, but also perhaps also the opportunities that you see in going forward on these two? Thanks a lot.
Great. Does it work? Yep, good. So first of all, thank you also for having IMEC here. Maybe I always have to take a step back and ask the question about how many people actually have heard about IMEC before. The Flemish government representatives cannot raise their hands. So how many people have heard about IMEC before? Okay. And how many people actually kind of have a good sense and grasp of what IMEC does? Don't be shy. Huh? Okay, so a bit less. So I think if we would have asked this question 4 years ago, there might have been even lesser hands, right? So it shows a bit the changing world that IMEC is in. But I think, given what I just saw, maybe a couple of points that are important to stress about IMEC, because then you can understand also a bit the lenses through which we are looking at these issues. You mentioned already a couple, but first of all, yes, we are a research organization, 41 years young, and a non-for-profit. So I think that's an important element. The second part is, yes, we're known for, of course, the work and the research on semiconductors, but actually IMEC is way more than that. So we look at what we call the whole stack, right? So of course, at the core, we look at semiconductors. We keep pushing the boundaries there of what technology can do. But on top of that, we also look at the technology platform layers, the software layers, and then the application layers. So how is this being used in end users sectors like automotive, life sciences, and health? So I just want that to stick with you, that it's not just semiconductors, it's looking at the whole stack. That was the second point. The third point, yes, we are very global, meaning we are, of course, our headquarters are in Leuven and Flanders, Belgium, but the partners that are there are a global representation of the semiconductor value chain, right? So all of those partners come to Europe, to Belgium, to kind of do that research. Now, yes, the world has changed. So given that as a lens through which we look, yeah, even for a research organization like IMEC, the world has changed. One concrete example is me. So a bit over, almost 4 years ago when I joined, this function didn't exist. So my function is looking at government relations, sitting within the strategy office, so trying to also look how this might impact our organization. So that function didn't exist. So that in itself is already an example of how the world has changed. Now, if we look at that changing world in the last kind of days, that's what you all have been doing. the way that I try to look at it is, from a research organization perspective, I see 3 layers. If you take a triangle, and the bottom layer for us, that's the important layer, of course, the most important layer, which is looking at technology development, innovation, the digital infrastructure. That layer is crucial. On top of that, of course, there is a economics and geoeconomics. And if you then go to all the way in the top, you have a bit of a political layer. And clearly, they're all interconnected and influence each other at different points. So if I zoom in on that technology layer, that's pretty stable. Let's not forget that, right? So if you look at the last couple of months and years have been challenging, but all those partners are still there doing that research with us. And not just with us. Global innovation is still happening on a day-to-day basis. Industry collaboration with research and technology organizations is still happening. And the reason why that is there's a couple of core aspects. Why do all the companies from all over the world come to one place to do that research? Well, it's pre-competitive research. It's because, of course, they manage to also bring down the cost of that research. Now, they'll still do their own research, right? What they learn, they'll bring back and they build on top of that. But there is this layer that is crucial for them to be able to learn, even from competitors, in a pre-competitive fashion, so they can also move faster. It's not just about bringing the cost down, it's about moving faster and making sure that the innovation development cycles move faster. At the same time also, by doing so, you actually avoid, to a great extent, duplications across the world, right? So some countries or regions might be strong in some areas than others, but at least you create these dependencies. And it actually creates this global interconnected world that we're in the semiconductor value chain. So this strong international collaboration is crucial. I'm going to make a provocative statement. Depends on probably who you talk to, but Europe's sovereignty, pure sovereignty, is not going to happen in this space, I mean, right? Thinking that we will have a completely independent semiconductor value chain within Europe, I think, and this is my personal opinion, it's a slight disclaimer, but I don't think that's going to happen. It's going to also be very costly. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, if you look at the research side, then, is how do we make sure that we can still move fast forward? We can be resilient as Europe, but within that global frame. Now, we're not naive, right? Clearly, the discussions we've been having here, this is under pressure. I mentioned the geoeconomics. Clearly, that is also pressuring our model. And so it makes it for a research organization also very complex. Sometimes we might have to make choices about who we work with that we wouldn't have thought that we would have to do 5 years ago. Right? So it's challenging also our innovation model, but also our business model. It puts not only stress on us as an organization, but also on all the players, because there is creating this uncertainty, like, can we still do this research? Again, for now, it's still happening, but you can feel this. You can feel it also with the partners, of which some are in the room here, because we have seen an increase in other partners in the world approaching IMEC to see how we can be strengthened ties. So you can feel this realignment happening as we basically speaking. But I also want to say a positive point. This uncertainty has created opportunities, including for IMEC. The CHIPS Act in Europe is an example of a way that Europe tried to address this. We're discussing now the CHIPS Act version 2. And it has, for example, also for IMEC, there's a big investment coming, combined Flanders and European money. So we can take a next leap in our research together with our partners. So I think there's a great opportunity. It has also focused Europe in taking some actions that you outlined, and also pushed certain member states maybe to go in a direction that some time ago they might not want it to go. So I think we need to harness this momentum and move forward. Now, looking forward to tomorrow's strategy or doctrine or whatever the world will be, where it will be. And I think probably what's important, I think there is, it should be focused also on an industrial policy, right? Doing all these action in isolation and vacuum is not going to help. So we really need to see also from a European perspective, what are those sectors in Europe that are crucial and that we need to support? How can we support it via the CHIPS Act, via maybe some more defensive measures? That should be the end goal. And that's how we will be looking at what comes out tomorrow to see if we believe that we can take that next step. So I'm going to round it up, and I'm sure we're going to come back to some of the points. Just moving forward, one call to action, double down on innovation here in Europe. So take the next step, be it the CHIPS Act, be it, of course, the next FP10 program. Move forward, not backward-looking, forward-looking. Also, double down on supporting the industrial sectors here in Europe, right? And connecting industry and the R&D part even stronger than we're doing now. And on the international collaboration, just closing off with that maybe, what we are seeing, yes, it's shifting, but the essence of those countries that share our values, that share our focus on research and innovation is still there. Let's move beyond that rhetoric level, the political layer. Right? Can we focus on, for example, cementing more research alliances between those like-minded, allied countries, whatever we want to call it, because that will also give some direction for the research community, like, this is the foundation, these are the partners we can still work on, because that will eliminate some of that uncertainty. Will it eliminate everything? No, but it will create a bit maybe that foundation in which we can then build on as a research organization I'm talking now. I'll leave it at that. I'm sure we'll have some more to discuss later.
Thanks a lot, Chris. So I really like your 3 layers. So the first being really on technology development and innovation, geoeconomics, and political layer, and also the fact that you mentioned that global value chain, especially at the high intensity technology, they tend to be very sticky. It's very difficult to find immediately some substitutes for research or for different products. And I also like the point about the opportunities that this actual very challenging geoeconomic environment can produce for Europe. And I think I wrote here that we need to make some strategic decisions, right? The first one in the strategic sectors, or the kind of areas that we need to either to protect or to promote, or both, and also the partners that we need for perhaps also for some strategic sectors, some partners, and for others, so to be able to be flexible, just following what Maria said. Turning to you now, Professor Suzuki, you are a long-time expert on economic security and technology. I would like to ask you also, because I know that Japan has a long history, actually, of economic security doctrine and practice as well, I will say. So I would like to ask you, how do you see this balance between security and openness, and what perhaps also can we learn in Europe from the Japanese perspective, or what Japan can learn also from the European, if you see that there could be such a thing, please.
All right. Thank you, Antonio, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting panel. I think, yes, as you said, Japan has a long history of the economic security, which starts from the incident in 2010 when China has stopped exporting the rare earth mineral to Japan, and that was a wake-up call for Japan that, you know, if you don't have the autonomous capabilities of supplying, you know, having alternative measures to defer these economic statecraft, then you'll be enslaved to the, you know, those countries which exercise the economic statecraft or the economic coercion. So it is basically the question of security. But the point that you mentioned about the openness and the security is that I think, you know, we have to come back to the word, the small yard high fence. You know, although the United States, which, well, this was a word coming out of Jake Sullivan, you know, the Biden administration's advisor for the national security, he said that, you know, it's a small yard high fence. We need to contain all these security matters into a small yard, and then leave other things in the free trade. So basically, the Japanese approach is to make sure that where the line should draw, and in case of the United States, the yard is getting bigger and bigger, and it eventually, you know, all the national security matters expanded this yard to almost the entire thing. I mean, including the, you know, the Section 232 tariff on the furniture, or, you know, so it just go beyond the usual understanding of what is strategic and the security. But in case of Japan, we established the Economic Security Promotion Act in 2022 to limit and to identify what is the important strategic items. So these are the 15 items, including, 12 items, including the fertilizers, the semiconductor, the critical mineral, even the cloud services, the aircraft parts, the, you name it. These are the 12 items that is considered that we are dependent on the other countries, which means that we are lacking the autonomy of the supply chain, and then we need to build the resilience of the supply chain. So I think this identification of the strategic item is extremely important, because otherwise, you just go beyond all this, the fence, and then, you just spill over everything, and just breaking down this whole, value chain network, through the free trade. So this distinction creates the sort of a recognition that we are dependent on the other things, the things, and especially on the particular countries such as China, and this will create the leverage to China for exercising its leverage against us. So on the other hand, so vulnerability is the flip side of the dependency. So reducing a dependency is the resilience. So how do we reduce the dependency? We need to cultivate, and we need to find out the alternative supply chain. But usually, in the free market, the dependence is a product of the free trade. I mean, basically, you are choosing the most economic, most efficient, productions and the products coming out of the most cheaper places. So basically, if you leave the companies to decide where to procure the items, where, how to build the supply chain, then it naturally creates the dependency. So in order to create the alternatives, you need to set some sort of financial measures to invest in the companies to choose the alternative items, which are, alternative supply chain, which are more expensive and which may not be economic. But in order to activate and then, incentivize the companies to do so, you need to have financial measures. And in case of rare earth mineral, I mean, this is also a critical issue because of the cost of extracting and separating and processing the rare earth. It is very toxic, it is radioactive, and if you want to do so in the major industrialized countries, then it will cost you a lot in order to contain and treat these toxic waste. So the cost of producing the rare earth mineral outside of China is extremely expensive. And therefore, we need to find the alternative way to see how to be acceptable, how to create the supply chain which is price-wise acceptable to the industry. And this is one of the reasons why Japan has invested in Australia as well as Malaysia and Vietnam to do the extractions and the processing and the separation and the processing in different countries, and to make sure that we build the alternative supply chain without touching upon the Chinese soil. So that is basically cost you a lot, because you need to invest a lot, you need to build new factories, but you need to do that in order to get the alternatives. So yes, the supply chain, resilience is easy to say, but it's really hard to do, because you need to have a commitment of the government to build up the to invest the resources to build up this alternative supply chain. And that is basically the experience that we have done. And it is also very important that we are not just simply be autonomous, but we also need to be indispensable. Because in this network of the supply chain, the power of the statecraft comes from the indispensability. The China has the power because Chinese rare earth is indispensable. Everyone depends on it. The United States has the indispensability of market. Therefore, when the Trump administration sets all the tariffs, then people rush to the White House and negotiate because we cannot live without the US market. So that's the market indispensability. We need to create those indispensability in the goods or in the market. So what kind of indispensability we have? Japan is very good in, let's say, machine tools, the material, and semiconductor manufacturing equipments, and also the IMEC is now working with Rapidus. So we are now having this sort of an indispensable. Creating the Rapidus is to aim for the indispensability of the high-end chips. It is different from TSMC. So those are the kind of policies you also need to invest in order to get the indispensability, to gain the certain power against the others, to deter the exercise of the statecraft against us. So this is what we call the economic security. Economic security is about the security. It is how to maintain the status quo, how to maintain the peaceful order in your market. And I think, yes, the resilience of supply chain is important, but if you want that, you need to invest. If you want to have the indispensability to deter other countries to coerce you, then you need to invest. And that's the kind of action that you need to take. And this is what the Takaichi government is trying to do. The Takaichi government is now setting up something called the growth strategy planning. And I am, luckily being a member of the growth strategy conference, which is the expert panel for supporting or advising to this strategy. And this is basically aiming for the indispensability, because we need to build up our indispensability. At the end of the day, this is the competitiveness. If you are competitive and dominant in the market, then you become indispensable. So it's the economic strategy, growth strategy, and the geoeconomic strategy. So that's what we need to do, and probably I think that may be the sort of a hint for the European countries to think about. I'll stop here.
Fantastic, and thanks a lot for bringing the concept of strategic indispensability that I think is very crucial also in the debate about Europe. And I also like the point about the critical raw materials. I think if we need to pick some sectors that are strategic and that government intervention is needed, I think critical raw materials is a perfect example of that, right? Because on the supply side, you need the government to incentivize private investment because the margins are really small.
Yeah.
So basically, you cannot expect private entrepreneurs just to enter in order to make money because the margin is really low. And then you need to convince the industry not to buy cheap materials from China, but to buy, like slightly more expensive, perhaps compensate for the difference, right? In order to be more secure. So that's a perfect example in which actually that strategic sector is strategic, and you need to intervene. There are others in which you can let the market or trade agreements just do the job. I know that we have quite some time, so I would like to ask a follow-up question to each of you, but you should answer very briefly, because then I would like also to give the opportunity for the floor to ask question. I will go in the same order. I will start with you, Maria, because I think I would like to go back to the predictability, flexibility kind of trade-off, because you mentioned that the European Union is very active in having different type of agreements with different countries, so having this more plurilateral kind of framework. I was wondering if you have ideas on how to connect all these agreements together. And if there is a need, for instance, for some sort of more institutional fora in which all these things can be connected, or how do you see basically the connection between different agreements? I will start with you, and then I will ask different type of questions to the other two speakers. Please, Maria.
How to, right, in terms of tools, tools that we use to engage with countries with a view to facilitate trade, get commitments, commit on market access, including investment. We do tend to conclude them on a bilateral basis, although not always. Think about Mercosur as a conclusion with a group of 4 countries. We do sometimes resort, but it's very trade specific, to tools such as accumulation of rules of origin, with a view to facilitate trade within, say, for instance, the European Union and the North Africa countries. I am not convinced that at this point there is a need, or one should put as a priority the interlinkage of trade agreements. I do think at this point I will give priority to, and this is the policy the Commission is following, to trying to be more agile and faster, and if needed, more targeted in terms of what we negotiate. I think the times of these big endeavors where you do negotiate very big free trade agreements is getting to an end. We still have very interesting and important negotiations underway. But for instance, we have started experimenting with a new approach, the Clean Trade and Investment Partnerships. We just concluded the first of such partnerships with South Africa, where what we're trying is to say, okay, if you look at what we need at the moment, and that goes back to the discussion you were having as to critical raw materials, or for instance, access to alternative means of energy, or certain types of technologies, you might want to target specific countries where there might be, on the one hand, an interest by those countries. I take the example of South Africa, to have investment in their value chains with value creation in those countries. And that may go into issues that often otherwise in trade you do not agree to easily, such as, for instance, local content requirements, but with a view as well to establish value chains that allow for, say, not only the critical raw material processing, but the first step within value chain that could lead to export of certain products to the European Union. These far more strategic and targeted type of engagements is, in my view, something we need to prioritize. There are always challenges from the point of view of trade, including trade law, as to whether you can do that without reaching a number of the commitments we have. But I do trust that there are ways to address this. The points you were making about indispensability and about having less dependencies, I agree with you. We're not gonna. It does require a very clear and granular prioritization. You need to know where you need to invest. You need to know where your biggest dependencies, the most dangerous ones, are. We're never gonna live in a dependency-free world. Even dependencies from countries that we're not comfortable having dependencies from, we're not gonna change that. Japan started working on critical raw materials back in 2010 with very important investment, including in Australia, with Linus and others, and you have reached what is a 50% of non-dependency in that sector.
Yeah, well, it went down to this 57%, and now currently above the 70% dependency. Yeah.
So it really is an exercise in understanding what is it that you need to give priority with, among other things as well, because funding is not infinite, and also because a number of these things require, in some cases, decades. So you don't reproduce them just at the whim of a measure or a set of investments or policy documents. Anyways, it's a bit more complicated than the standard way of engaging with the countries, but a far more important one at this point.
Thanks, Maria. And I would like to ask a follow-up question to Christoph along these lines, actually, because you mentioned research alliances, so focusing really on also on pre-competitive research and collaboration with partners. Do you think that this is enough to achieve strategic indispensability? And given that you said, and I agree with you, that if you look at the panorama global of innovation is still very much global and interconnected, but do you see, do you think that the trend is really going in that direction, or perhaps in the opposite direction, for instance, in the creation also of different kind of research and innovation blocks that compete to each other? And what are the challenges for the Europeans if the trend is really going towards the creation of different blocks?
That's an easy one, right? So let me first start with some points that Maria also mentioned on the dependencies. Again, trying to take the positive approach, right? So other countries and regions are dependent on us. So those are our strengths. And I think we should also not lose sight of the strengths, right? Because there's always this kind of like, there's the gap, we're going to fix it. And then in the meantime, lose sight of the strengths. And I think on the strengths, Europe has a lot, right? On the research landscape, of course, not just IMEC, there's a lot of strong players on that in Europe. On the equipment supplier side, right, clearly ASML is one, but we have ASM and other companies in Europe. So we have strengths in Europe. Let's also keep an eye on how do we make sure that they can continue to grow, right? And that we also invest in that, because yes, indeed, some of these things might be very costly. And it's not always, if you look at the triangle with the political layer, medium to long-term thinking is maybe not always what comes to mind. And so I think keeping the eye also on the horizon, which is something that IMEC does constantly, right? So 10, 15 years out, where do we want to be? What are the investments that we have to make now? And I think one of those discussions that are going to pop up in Europe is the discussion on advanced manufacturing. And Japan took indeed some measures on that in their first, like the wave of first CHIPS Acts. Rapidus was created, and we're partnering at Rapidus. I think Europe is very quickly going to have that discussion again about, okay, mature innovation, mature chips, and Xperia was a nice example of that, but also the more advanced side, right? Do we as Europe want to make sure that we also have some capabilities in this space? It will be costly, it will require medium to long-term vision, but actions that we will need to take next year. So now answering your question, it's a bit linked. Is there a risk of blogs being created on research, right? Instead of kind of a global research alliance, you get kind of really pockets of research collaboration. Yes, that is a risk. That's what I meant with, of course, there's stress on the model, there's stress within the system. There is a bit of a pull from the geoeconomic layer and the political layer on that research collaboration. But I do believe for now it's holding. But it can quickly escalate, and R&D model can, by certain actions, can be torn apart. And I think we will all lose with that. And I don't think Europe will be the first one to do so. But I do think we also need to be, as Europe, think a bit about the tools that we're now building up, how to use it wisely, and make sure that they're there, but that we also think about the impact if we activate one on that medium and long term. So I think there is a risk, and we will collectively have to work on that. But what I started with, my story a bit earlier, was I do feel that that foundation is still there, but we should not take it as a given.
Thanks a lot, Christoph. And I have a related question also to Kazuto, because I want to include another layer. It is really the financial investments that are needed to actually being more innovative and more competitive, and also the fact that other countries, for instance, if you look at the money that the United States companies, private companies are investing on the entire AI stack, really the challenge is how do we leverage these financial investments, and do you have some sort of best practices coming from Japan, like on how can we generate and how can we incentivize private and public investment, and perhaps also how can we ensure that private and public investments are coordinated, given the long history of Japan of public-private partnership. So if you have some ideas or thoughts, I think this will really broaden the debate.
Right. Well, talking about the investment, there are a lot of aspects in this, but what is interesting is that Japan and the United States has concluded a MOU on the investment in return for the lowering the tariffs on the on the so-called the reciprocal tariff and automobile tariff, and Japan committed the $550 billion to invest in the United States, but these are the investment basically for the United States economic security, focusing on the energy supply and some of the semiconductor issues. Well, I think Japan has some instruments to combine the private and the public investment. Japan has an organization called the JBIC. This is a Japan Bank of International Cooperation, and also Japan has the government sort of a governmental financial organization like DPJ, the Development Bank of Japan, that is to invest in the industry. And also there are various instruments that is the public money can support the projects, and these projects will allow the companies to borrow money from the private sector. So this is a combination, what we call the bankability. So making those companies and the actors, the economic actors, bankable is the key concept in a private-public financing system. For example, the investment that we make for the Rapidus is originally it started with the Japanese government investment as the subsidies, but this will only allow for them to start building the factories. But the Rapidus itself needs to run the companies, hire more people, and they need to borrow money. So these initial government funding is used to increase the bankability, which means that there will be more clarity and the certainty in the businesses that they work. So there is a sort of combinations or collaborations of the public and private finances. But when it comes to the question of the supply chain resilience, I think it is extremely important for the Japanese government is the one which provides the foundational fundings to make sure that will compensate the cost that the companies have to pay for the alternative supply chain, for example. If you try and find the alternative supply chain, you need to, there are always a premium. And for example, the rare earth mineral that is extracted from Australia and processed in Vietnam is imported in Japan, and probably the price difference is about the 20%. Of course, it depends on the elements and it depends on the market. So I'm just speaking roughly. These 20% premium is just basically acceptable for the companies to pay as an insurance. I mean, you need to keep we are not reducing the dependency entirely to zero. We are going down up to the 57% and now coming back to 70% because, the premium is high. So 20% more is not, sometimes it's not acceptable because of the expansion of the businesses on using rare earth. So I think these are the kind of things that the Economic Security Promotion Act is allowing those public funding agencies to support the government, which are trying to support the companies which are trying to build up the alternative supply chain route. So I think these are we need to have a legal system to allow the companies to be funded by the public money, but these instruments are already there in Japan. So I think that might answer your question.
Thanks a lot, and I think also very important the emphasis on public-private cooperation and the different forms that this can take. I know that in Europe we are also doing some work on this, but let me open the floor for questions and comments. I see many hands, but let me start with the gentleman over there, and then the three of you.
Thank you. Philip Shuttler-Jones from the Royal United Services Institute in London. I wanted to ask a question mainly to Professor Suzuki. About 3.5 weeks ago, the Japanese Prime Minister said some things which really annoyed the Chinese government. And it's the kind of thing which in the past triggered kind of economic coercion, punishments. And this time there was some punitive measures, but they were quite restricted to advising tourists and students to stay away from Japan or cutting trilateral diplomacy with Korea. But so far, not something like you had 10 years ago with the rare earths. Is it already possible to trace a connection between the steps you've taken in Japan to somewhat neutralize this weapon and the fact that you didn't get this kind of punishment so far this time around? I mean, are you already reaping the benefits of the changes that you've done? Thanks.
Many thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the interesting discussion up until now. I'm Freya from the Mission of Japan to NATO. I have a question with regards to international theory, if you will indulge me. So throughout the panels today, we have seen mostly focus on countries, the US, China, but here we are talking about companies, economy, industry. So I was wondering what in your mind the contribution to policy change as might be from state, like from companies as well as just research, industry, etc.
Okay, very good. Let's collect other two questions, and then I see Tongfi over there.
Thank you. My name is Zsuzsa Ferenci. I'm with the Martín Center here in Brussels, and I spent the past 5 years in Taiwan. So that brings me to IMEC and TSMC. I've looked closely at Taiwan's ecosystem in terms of semiconductors, and I don't need to say more to you, Christoph, if I may, about that, because IMEC has presence in Taiwan and there's complementarity in terms of research and manufacturing. So how do you navigate as IMEC the geopolitics of Taiwan and China, and also the China factor? That's more the broader question, and more specifically, what are your plans in pulling Taiwan more in, or perhaps bringing IMEC closer into Taiwan? And thirdly on that, how do you work on the joint challenge, I guess, for both Europe and Taiwan when it comes to talent cultivation? I know you have some university collaboration. Do you have any specifics you could share with us on that? Thank you.
Very good. Tongfi?
Thank you for the stimulating discussion. I'm Tongfi Kim at CSDS. My question is for the entire panel, and basically, if you think of geoeconomic cooperation between Europe and East Asian allies like Japan or South Korea, what are the most promising areas to work on? And more interestingly, perhaps, what are the least promising areas, projects that you don't recommend these governments to embark on? Thank you.
Excellent question, Tongfi. Let's see if there is one final question, perhaps. Yeah, please, Osha.
Hi, I'm Hocha Shao. I'm doing a PhD in CSDS Center. I have a question mostly for María and Suzuki-san. When talking about critical raw material and semiconductor industry, it would be very difficult not to look at automotive industry, which is also my research interest. And I'm just wondering, like, when compared to China's automotive plan, and the EU later, this year also initiated their own automotive plan. As far as I understand, it's relatively more fragmented and more like sector focused, and while China is mostly more ecosystem focused. I'm just wondering, like, do you think the EU is possibly following the same path? I mean, of course, two systems, so have like two different way of like framing. But I'm just wondering, like, you know, how the EU can better to collaborate with other sector in kind of like saving the automotive industry in a way. And I think it's also related to what Christoph just mentioned, like, yes, semiconductor is something that the West has an advantage on. What about automotive industry? Because it's also related to critical raw material, and then we also wanted to have better like environmental policy within the EU. So in this kind of like conflict, then, you know, from your advice as a research, how we can better cement this issue. Thanks.
Okay, I think we have a very rich set of questions. I propose that we go in the reverse order, if for you it's okay. Professor Suzuki, I will start with you. You have a question about economic coercion, and also perhaps the question more on the theoretical front on state-business relations. What is the role of the private sector, and whether the private sector can be an agent of change? That I found a very interesting question, and of course you can pitch in on the other things if you want, please.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for the questions. Probably, you know, you read every day that China is escalating, or the rhetoric, but the reality is that you know, the Chinese coercive measures are, to a certain extent, very limited and not as excessive. I think it is not because Japan is building its autonomous capabilities. You know, Japan still has a lot of vulnerabilities, and there are other various ways that China can coerce Japan and to intimidate Japan. So I think China is deliberately not exercising those leverage. Probably they are just saving for the later, or maybe they are just not trying to escalate more, or I don't know. I mean, it's just a guessing game. But so far, it's very restrictive and not so escalating. But that does not necessarily mean that we are free from the Chinese economic coercions. There are still other means. For example, I'm not trying to encourage China to do so, but arresting a Japanese businessman, or the rare earth is of course the part of it, but there are other types. For example, the chemicals for the ingredients of the medicines, or there are many other things that is still we are vulnerable. We named 12 different sectors which are still vulnerable. And these are not yet solved. I mean, it takes ages to build more resilience. So we are still, just 2 steps, we took just only 1-2 steps away. So it's far from the goal. The other questions about the role of company. I think what is important in economic security is the collaboration between the government and the company. Usually, the government's strategy and the company's interest are not always aligned with. So you need to have a constant dialogue between the government and the industry to make sure that both are understanding each other. Not necessarily, align their actions each other, but at least the government should provide the informations and necessity of understanding what are the risks and what will be the consequences if you continue depending on someone, a particular country. Meanwhile, the company has to say, if the government takes certain measures and which may have a significant impact on the industry, then what will be the consequences? So this is, the Takaichi government's growth strategy is the product of this dialogue to make sure that we continue investing on for the growth, but meanwhile we are trying to build up the, the certain resiliencies. So again, like Maria said, it needs to be balanced. But, the balance is always can be found only in the dialogue between the government and the industry. And finally, I think the automobile industry. I think the way in which that China invests in this sector, and Japan, South Korea, and Europe has built a completely different ecosystem. So I think it is not comparable in the way in which that the industrial policy works. And I think, to a certain extent, I think it is extremely difficult to challenge the large scale. I think, there was a discussion on the scale of the industry, and probably, for example, the AI systems, trying to build a large language model, to compete with the US and the Chinese companies is probably a very hard task, and it's not really worth investing in. And I think that's probably in the same for the electric vehicle, and probably I think that's one of the area where you want to maintain the the industrial competitiveness, but it will be very difficult to compete with this the scale of China. So I think from a Japanese point of view, we are investing more in the hybrids rather than the electric vehicles. So that's why you don't see much the Japanese electric vehicle in the European market, because I think the competing in this market may not be the wise idea. So I think this should be some sort of a the company strategy as well as the national strategy. But from a in Japan, the automobile industrial policy doesn't exist. Basically, it's the companies which makes the decision. So we are not there are certain incentives for the consumers to buy electric vehicles. There are subsidies for that, but beyond that, I don't think there's not much of the so-called industrial policy in the automobile.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Suzuki. I think this was a terrific answers. Christoph, back to you, and you have, of course, the Taiwan question. I would like to add an additional question for you, and it's about the battle for talent. So, of course, to be indispensable and to actually move in the direction of the research alliance, we need to be able in Europe to attract talent or to retain the talent that we have, for instance, in European university and research center to remain here. What can we do in order to basically to either maintain or to attract foreign human capital and to convince them to work in Europe, please?
Yes. So maybe first address your question. So maybe start off with China. So yeah, 5 years ago, I guess again the world was different. So we did have a lot of collaborations with Chinese partners, like a lot of other people. We're phasing those out. Second point, Taiwan. Let me make a distinction between Taiwan and the industrial base in Taiwan, because those are the partners that we work with, TSMC and some others. They do the research, of course, in Leuven. And your question was, how are there plans to pull Taiwan in? Again, we're looking at pulling Taiwanese industry in. That's what I meant. Yes, they are here. They are already doing a lot of that research 20 minutes from here. Now, there will be another discussion as I mentioned earlier, in the context of Next Chips Act, like what is the next step that Europe has to take to increase some of its capacities? And I'm sure some of those companies will be part of that conversation. Not saying that they will go in a certain direction, but at least they will be sitting at the table and having that conversation about how they could do or not more in Europe. So I think there's going to be that level of conversation, but they are already here. They are already participating and investing, also not just in Leuven, but across Europe. TSMC, for example, also opened recently again a design center in Bavaria. Of course, they're also in Dresden with ESMC, right? So I think there's a lot of steps already taken. Joint challenge on talent. So we'll zoom out for a moment because it basically, I don't think we need to focus on Taiwan or the companies there only. Clearly, this is an issue. We are struggling ourselves too as IMEC. On average, we have 300 vacancies. So IMEC is 6,000 people. So we have 300 vacancies on average that are open. So it is a challenge. Now, how are we addressing that? Because you said, maintain, or attract foreign talent, all of the above. So we need to, and we actually have programs to do that. We are investing at a younger age even for students to start focusing on this. And then if you completely up to PhDs and postdocs, we have around 800 PhDs and postdocs working with IMEC. So we're working on this throughout the entire life almost of what you could say for a researcher. So we as Europe need to keep focusing on that, but we are saying that for a long time. So I think in the next CHIPS Act there will probably be again this focus. The question is, because a lot of this also is a member state priority, competency. How do we jointly push that? On the attract part, again, we have around 100 nationalities at IMEC in Leuven. So attracting that is a crucial part of the ability to do that. So it's going to have to be an and story. But I think it's going to get worse before, you see, I like to be a bit provocative, but it's going to get worse before it's going to get better on this. But at last point on that, I do believe what is helping, this maybe goes to the automotive question, because I also want to address that one. Automotive, clearly an important sector for Europe. I think clearly some companies also made automotive sector really sexy, meaning for students to really start looking into that, because it's not just semiconductors as an isolation, it's about how do you support certain areas like automotive, but also life sciences and health. I think there's a lot of exciting things happening there. So that pull will also work a bit on the talent side, because you make it very concrete. Europe and automotive, strong priority. We actually opened a research center now in Germany. IMEC Germany exists now, which is focused on chiplet design, automotive chiplet design. Why there? Because of course there's a lot of the automotive players there. There's a lot of the talent there. And so Europe's automotive plan, we're also plugging into that, but we're also taking steps within Europe to try to boost that work. So I know it's all connected, but I think on automotive, we will face, the next 5 years will be crucial for our sector in Europe.
Thank you very much. Maria, last word to you. There were many questions for you, but I realized that we haven't addressed the Tong's question about the most promising areas of cooperation, the least promising one, and also if you want to say some words on the European automotive industry, feel free to do so, please.
Okay, well, most promising areas of cooperation with partners like Japan or Korea, that's always very difficult to determine. I think with both countries we do have a very solid base because of having rather strong commitments in terms of access to our markets and a long-standing habit of working and discussing problems together. When I think about the type of cooperation going forward, there's been a lot of discussions on, in particular with Japan, critical raw materials and semiconductors. But you could say, well, this is a little bit of a reactive mode because of the challenges we have been facing as regards access to critical raw materials because of the almost full domination in some of them of China and their use of export controls to manage trade in a way, and it's been a reality that is going to be there still for years to come, in my view. Semiconductors, I think, is a similar story. The question is, what are the new areas? What are the new sectors where we need to concentrate? And here there is a mixture of trade and investment policy, but it's also industrial policy. Industrial policy in Europe always have an extra challenge because you have 27 member states. I often, when I hear Japanese colleagues and now Professor Suzuki talking about the way to go in cooperation with industry. I almost have a pinch of jealousy. You know, I wish I was METI because it's much more of a habit and a symbiosis, that capability to work and exchange with industry. That at the European level is a bit more complex, basically because there are also 27 different economies, in some instances with very clear different priorities and industrial capabilities. So there is a step there where our capability to work with industry needs to be reinforced. And that's one of the things you will read about in our strategy going forward as regards economic security. As regards the automotive industry, I'm not an expert in the automotive industry. What I can say again is we need to make an effort not to be just reactive. What we are going through at the moment in terms of competition from China in this sector is what we will be facing in many other sectors. And I do sometimes think that we are a bit behind the curve when you hear people talking about, yes, it's because no market policies and practices and it's subsidies being granted in a manner that it is not justified, illegal, et cetera, et cetera. It's all of that, but there is also an extremely competitive, innovative ecosystem at a size which is gigantic. That means we're going to see that even in instances in which subsidies are not granted or are removed, we're going to see that as a challenge in one after the other sector. You can guess as to which one will be next, but you can also look into the 5 years plans and what are the next areas of interest, and that is going to go beyond manufacturing, and that is going to get, for instance, in the area of services. Yep, there is a tough competition out there. There is absolutely no doubt.
Absolutely. Let's end on this note the panel. I think unfortunately it's time to wrap up. I'm saying unfortunately because I'm really enjoying the conversation with you. I'm not going to summarize everything that was said here, but please join me for a warm applause to our excellent speakers for their insights. And now I'll give the floor to my colleagues for the concluding remarks. I think we can stay here for 2 minutes. It's going to be short.
Even one. Just a few concluding words. Thanks a lot to all of you for being here. It's been a great pleasure. So I just would like to say thank you to our sponsor, our partners once again, but also our moderator, our speakers. I think we had a great debates today. Thank you also for your great question. I think those really made a difference. Once again, thank you to our colleagues as well. You saw them around here today, and this was really a truly collective effort. So thanks a lot once again to all the colleagues who contributed. And before concluding, just a few words to say to please stay connected with us, to continue to support our work. You can follow our research, upcoming events and publication across all our online platform, our website, our social media, so please engage. And of course, we very much hope we will see you again for the next edition, the 5th edition of the Brussels Indo-Pacific Dialogue. Thanks again, and see you next year.
Thank you very much, Maria. It was great.